Mary Lou McDonald, welcome to HARDtalk.
Thank you.
Ireland is changing remarkably fast, both in terms of its social and cultural attitudes, its politics too. Now, your party, Sinn Féin, is steeped in the past. How can you persuade the Irish people that you can be agents of change?
Well, I think you're right to say that Ireland is changing, and in some respects quite dramatically. I mean, we had a recent referendum on the very vexed social issue of abortion rights, and I think more than anything else in recent times that is a weather vane for just how radically Irish public opinion has changed and the extent to which we now live in a much more diverse, much more open, much more tolerant society. You know, a year ago or slightly more, of course, we had the referendum on marriage equality. Again, another not quite so vexed, but nonetheless a contentious issue. And similarly, the population of Ireland demonstrated that they were well ahead in many cases of their politicians and their political leaders. And Sinn Féin, in both of those instances, in both of those campaigns, was front and centre in making the argument for progress, in making the argument for change. And, you know, you say that we're steeped in the past and in history. Well, we have our history, we have our past. We are Ireland's oldest political party. But every nation, every political movement has a past, has its history, but also has its contemporary iteration, has its future plans. And for us, politics in Ireland now is all about mapping a way forward. We are the party that argues for Irish reunification. So I think more than any, we have a national project that's all about national democracy.
But it does mean, if you are truly committed to change, it does mean you're going to have to wrestle with forces inside your own party who aren't as ready for change as you are. You said not so long ago it's no longer about beards and black leather jackets. Obviously a nod to the paramilitaries, to the IRA. But that hasn't gone away, has it?
Well, actually, that reference that you've quoted back to me was all about the first common meeting that I went to, which was like actually the local branch of Sinn Féin. And at that time, the party was much more male, I suppose much more traditional in its outlooks and its views. And I know in the time, over 20 years now, I have personally experienced and witnessed, and I like to think have been part of leading a change within the party. And I now lead a party that is incredibly diverse, that has a huge and growing young membership, that has now not quite gender parity, but we're not far off it.
But what you haven't addressed in all of that, I know it's all very important, but what you haven't addressed is the degree to which you have to straddle the interests of the Republic of Ireland and the north of Ireland. Sinn Féin, of course, being committed to a united Ireland, has a significant presence in both. But the point I'm getting to is that you, as a Dubliner, as a middle-class Dubliner, of an age where the Troubles, as they're called in Northern Ireland, were not woven into your childhood and early adulthood, you are somebody that many of your party members in the north are suspicious of.
Well, they're not actually, and I don't know where.
Well, I can quote you a few who are, if you want me to.
Well, let me tell you that I'm the leader of the party, and I'm the leader on the basis of a huge degree of confidence and support from people right across the country. So don't buy into this fairly jaded now mythology that there is such a vast difference between Sinn Féin in the south and the north. You know, it's about 100 miles from where we sit into the centre of Belfast. It's not outer Kathmandu.
No, that's very true. But 100 miles geographically.
You've put the question. We share common social norms, social values. We live on the one island. And I'm a Dubliner. I'm very proud to be a Dubliner. I'm a woman of my age and of my generation. Of course, that marks me out as different to my predecessor, for example.
Yeah, well, you say to me, oh, I can guarantee you, you know, I'm not regarded with suspicion in the north of Ireland. Let me just give you one, for instance. It's an interesting one. You very recently went up to the city, which is known to Unionist Protestants in Northern Ireland as Londonderry, but known to Republicans and nationalists as Derry. And you very deliberately referred to it as Londonderry. Now that outraged some people in your own party and your own community in the north of Ireland. Just to quote one, former internee, nationalist Republican Mickey Donnelly, after you said Londonderry, he said, "I'm shocked, I'm outraged, and Mary Lou has shown her lack of Republican credentials."
Well, that certainly would not reflect the view right across the party. You're right. We refer to Andira Columcilla as Derry. You're right. And our unionist neighbours refer to it as Londonderry.
And these symbols, these things matter.
Hold on. Of course it matters. That's why I stepped out of my vernacular into the vernacular of our unionist neighbours. And it was very obviously a gesture on my part of recognition, but also of common courtesy to the person who had hosted us. That's my job. Leaders lead. And sometimes that might upset a fringe or a number of people within a particular movement.
And it's interesting, your vision of what leadership of Sinn Féin today means. And you've made some really interesting speeches, in one of which you talked about how your vision of United Ireland is a place where Arlene Foster, you said, who of course is the leader of the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland, you said, I want a place where Arlene Foster feels comfortable, feels secure, feels at home in my Ireland. How can Arlene Foster feel secure and comfortable as long as, and this is the words of the police chief of Northern Ireland, George Hamilton, just the other day, as long as the IRA structure, and he means the sort of leadership, administrative structure, remains intact. He said, not for terrorist purposes, but nonetheless, this IRA structure still exists. And he pointed out that it still wields influence in the Republican movement, and presumably one can only assume in Sinn Féin, and that it still maintains discipline in the Republican movement. Arlene Foster is never going to feel comfortable with that.
Well, firstly, the Ireland that I envisage is not my Ireland. It's our Ireland, and Arlene Foster has as legitimate a claim and a stake in that Ireland as I do. Secondly, whatever George Hamilton's view is on that matter, I want to tell you that I am the leader of Sinn Féin, that I am part of a collective leadership, that the Sinn Féin leadership calls the shots in our party.
So what's your relationship with the IRA then? These people that George Hamilton says are still out there, still wielding influence. What's your relationship with them? I have
no relationship with the IRA. I've never been a member of the IRA. I'm a Sinn Féin person, and I am the leader of Sinn Féin. I was democratically elected to this position. We are an open democratic party, and nobody dictates the pace to me.
You've also indicated that you're an ambitious politician, and of course in Ireland, given the nature of the political makeup of the country, usually Prime Minister's Taoiseachs are the result of coalition building. And you've said you're ready as Sinn Féin to work with the other main parties, whether it be Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. You're ready for coalition building. The problem you've got is that they're not prepared to work with you, because as far as they're concerned, you're still Sinn Féin, you're still associated with the IRA, with the men of violence, with what Michael Martin of Fianna Fáil calls the appalling atrocities of the past. They won't work with you. How are you going to fix that?
Each of the Irish political parties, it's simply a matter of when, but each and every one of them had a relationship with the IRA. It's just a function of Irish history. It's a function of the fact that we were colonised, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you're aware of that. The same people that you quote are the ones who encourage us, correctly by the way, to re-establish the power-sharing institutions in the north and to be in government with none other than the Democratic Unionist Party. A very challenging governmental partnership, as you can imagine. What I can tell you is that Sinn Féin is a party with the democratic mandate, that at the next election we hope to develop that mandate further.
Well, forgive me, but I believe you have, 23 seats in the Irish Parliament out of 150 odd?
Yes.
So you're not a huge player right now. You're significant, but you're not a big player. And the Prime Minister, who is very popular right now, Mr Varadkar, he says, I will never work with Sinn Féin because they're Eurosceptic, they're nationalistic, and even sectarian. The faces may get younger, but their politics remains the same.
Okay, and Mr Varadkar, our Taoiseach, relies on the support of Micheál Martin, who you have quoted, to keep him in government. So there's no clear-cut majority for any party. And of course political parties will jockey for position. I can simply say this, that we will seek our democratic mandate, and after the next election I will talk to the political parties, I will talk to independent members of the Dáil. I can only speak for myself. If these two gentlemen that you've quoted are saying they won't talk to me, well, just bear in mind they're also saying that they won't talk to each other, so they run the very serious risk of winding up talking to themselves, but that's a matter for them.
What's a matter for you is how Irish people perceive you as a party offering them the prospect of a more prosperous Ireland. Mm-hmm. Now, you're a big state, old-fashioned socialist party. Is that what the Ireland of the 21st century really wants?
The Ireland, the Dublin that you're sitting in, Stephen, is a country that came through the most horrific, horrendous economic crash. And that didn't happen on my watch. And that didn't happen on Sinn Féin's watch.
And the recovery hasn't happened on your watch either.
This happened on the watch of the very people who would lay the kind of analysis that you've articulated.
Yeah, Mary Lou McDonald, the truth is we sit in an island where the growth rate is over 6%, where unemployment is down to 6%, and the jobs growth is at record levels. We sit in an island which is the fastest growing economy in the European Union.
And you know what? 10 years ago, I'm sure if you'd been interviewing me, you would have rattled off the same statistics. And don't get me wrong, of course increases in employment is a good thing. Increased economic activity is a good thing, but you're also sitting in a Dublin that has a national emergency in housing. You're sitting in a jurisdiction that has a health service that is banjaxed and confused and inefficient. You're sitting in a place that is crying out for reform, crying out for decent investment in efficient public services, crying out for a level playing pitch, crying out for fair taxation, crying out for accountability, all of these things that old-fashioned lefty people like me believe in. And you're asking me, are they necessary components of a prosperous and progressive Ireland? And I would say to you, absolutely they are.
So you are sticking with the massive tax hike for the highest earning Irish people, you're sticking with rises in corporation tax, you're sticking with an economic plan which Goldman Sachs, and whatever you think about bankers, Goldman Sachs rather influentially declared Sinn Féin represents the biggest risk to Ireland's economic recovery. You're sticking with all of that, are you?
Well, firstly, we're not arguing for an increase in corporate tax. We're arguing actually for harmonisation of the corporate tax rate across the island between the two jurisdictions. Secondly, we're arguing for fair taxation. We're arguing on a matter of simple logic that grown-ups understand that things have to be paid for, services have to be paid for, and those with the deeper pockets and the broader shoulders carry somewhat more of the burden. And can I say, in respect to our friends at Goldman Sachs and the great bankers of this world, I think that they might just do a bit of self-analysis and ask themselves honestly what function they have served in terms of servicing the common good. Because you see, the difference between the Goldman Sachs and the bankers and me is that I am charged with the duty and the responsibility to act in the collective good. And do you know what that means, Stephen? Sometimes that means saying things that are difficult for very wealthy people to hear.
Well, it's not so much the wealthy people I'm interested in.
And nonetheless, they have to be pursued.
It's not so much the wealthy individuals, it's more the message you're sending to business. I mean, the business minister here has accused you of terrifying business.
Well, actually, one of the things that I have done since I became leader in February is I have made it my business to actually restart our conversation with Irish business. And I've gone to chambers of commerce, north and south, and we've had a conversation around skills capacity, we've had a conversation around infrastructure, around investment. And I think increasingly people understand that there's actually a lot of a shared agenda. And as for the minister that you quote, saying that we strike terror into the heart of business, that's just hyperbole. That's political posturing, in my view.
Well, there's plenty of political posturing going on the island of Ireland, not least in the north of Ireland. There is no devolved government. There hasn't been for basically a year and a half. The Stormont system of devolved government has broken down. Now, obviously, it takes two to tango, and it's not all the fault of Sinn Féin, but nonetheless, Sinn Féin's insistence that there can be no resumption of devolved government until the unionist political forces accept the Irish language as an official language in a way that they're not prepared to, that is stymieing any effort to get the devolution back. Are you prepared to compromise?
I mean, I think it's an absolute disgrace that we don't have our power-sharing institutions up and running in the north. And in fact, last February, the issues that you referred, one of which is Acta na Gaeilge, the issue of language rights, which, by the way, are enjoyed in Scotland and in Wales, We resolved those issues, and we had in fact arrived at an accommodation with Arlene Foster and the DUP. I say as a matter of deep regret, not to play the blame game because I've no interest in the blame game. It's a matter of deep regret to me that the DUP couldn't or wouldn't take that deal over the line. We moved. We compromised. The February agreement, I went out and said to our base, said to Northern Nationalists, this agreement is not perfectly formed to the nationalist eye. You will criticise this agreement. You will legitimately criticise this agreement. But what we have achieved is enough. It was sufficient to move forward. That remains my position. But I have to tell you this as well. The overarching issue and challenge of Brexit, the fact that people in the north of Ireland voted against Brexit, has meant that the DUP, in my view, have taken refuge, have gone into hiding in Westminster. They're under Theresa May's wing. She is certainly putting zero by way of pressure, encouragement or incentive on them to do the right thing and to re-establish the power-sharing institutions. Well, either way, it's not acceptable that we don't have the power-sharing institutions. You and I agree on that.
And you just suggested that, in your view, the DUP, the unionist stance on this, is connected to Brexit. So let's briefly talk about Brexit. Is it fair to say that you see Brexit as an enormous opportunity for Sinn Féin, in that if you play your cards right, whatever happens with the Brexit deal, it seems likely that it is going to raise new questions, new challenging questions about the possibility in the long term of a united Ireland? And is that your agenda here? You know, are you playing Brexit because you see it as an avenue to restart a debate about united Ireland?
Well, I think undoubtedly Brexit places the issue of the partition of Ireland and the Irish border front and centre. Of that there is no doubt. Brexit is a disaster. Brexit is a Tory-conceived vanity. It was something that was pursued with reckless abandon, irrespective of the consequences, it seems to me, for the island of Britain, but certainly with a willful disregard for the island of Ireland. I don't think Ireland even featured in the thinking of the Tories when they pursued this matter. To my way of thinking, it's premised on a very ugly agenda of exclusion, of anti-immigrant sentiment, of abusing and taking advantage of people's understandable insecurities and frustrations with the European project. I have to tell you, some of which I share. But the Brexit issue, let me tell you this, and this is the bottom line on this. We will not be, this country, Ireland, will not be the collateral damage in the Tory Brexit. End of story. So we have commitments, and we will hold people to these commitments, that there will be no hardening of the border on our island, that there will be no damage to the Good Friday Agreement, so painfully worked to and established, and that citizens in the north will not be robbed of their rights. But the government is
quite clear, well, I shouldn't say it's quite clear, but elements within the government appear to be absolutely sure that whatever the final deal in terms of custom arrangements and the economic arrangements between the United Kingdom and the European Union, they're quite sure that technical responses can be found to ensure that there needn't be customs posts and guard posts and all of that stuff. They say it's possible with modern technology to avoid all of that. So why are you making such a constant and such a big fuss about it?
Well, can I just say, and with the greatest of respect to the British government, they are bluffing, and they have presented non-solutions based on technological Alice in Wonderland fantasyland, each in which each of their proposals have been comprehensively discredited and disregarded quite correctly by the European negotiators. There's no question of custom posts or paraphernalia on the island of Ireland, but it's not just about that. It's about divergence in terms of regulation. It's about differing standards across everything, you name it. You name it, in every facet of our lives.
But the United Kingdom had every right to vote for Brexit, and Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom, so you are going to have to live with the reality of Brexit.
Well, I'm sorry to disabuse you of that notion. Brexit is, with all due respect to you, on the far side of the pond, is your creation, it's your baby, and it's your problem. It's not going to be ours. And I would also remind you that the British government is party to an internationally binding treaty called the Good Friday Agreement. And at the core of that is the concept of consent. And what the agreement says is that the people of the north of Ireland must consent to any change in the constitutional status of the north of Ireland. And of course, when the agreement was signed, that meant the union between Britain and the north. But I think that you can fairly and feasibly argue that the proposal to coerce the north of Ireland out of the European Union, despite the democratically expressed wishes and views of the people, actually flies in the face of the consent principle. And I have to tell you,
that sounds to me like a threat.
It's not a threat. I am arguing the case. By the way, I'm not. If you listen to the government here in Dublin, they are similarly taking a very firm position, as is Michel Barnier and his team of negotiators, because there is an obligation on everybody concerned to protect people's livelihoods, people's standard of living, and of course to protect the precious thing, the very precious thing that we have developed here in Ireland 20 years ago.
We're almost out of time, so a final thought on Brexit and the future of Ireland. You seem to be quite convinced that this whole debate about Brexit has, in a sense, revived the notion that a united Ireland is not that far away. Let me just quote to you the words of the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister here, Leo Varadkar. He said in a visit to Northern Ireland just last week, he said that he was coming as a neighbour, most definitely not as an invader, he said. And he went on to say that as far as he was concerned, if there were to be a referendum on unification, the people of the North would vote against it. And he said the time and the conditions, in his opinion, were simply not right to either think about having a referendum, let alone actually call for one.
And look, long before you would actually name a day for the referendum, of course we have to have an all of society, north to south, conversation about what does the new Ireland look like, because I am not so presumptuous. I'm not going to hand it down on tablets of stone. Why should I? This isn't something that's simply about Sinn Féin. This is a matter well beyond us, and unionism has a critical part to play, a critical voice. Those that will argue passionately for the maintenance of the union, and as is their right, also now need to think about, to talk about, to tell us what it is that they need, what it is that they require in this new Ireland. And we want to have that discussion with them in a calm way, in a respectful way. And as and whenever the date is for the referendum, I want two things. I want us to win it, but I want us to win it well and decently, with an emphasis on maximising consensus.
Will there be a referendum in your lifetime?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not a shred of doubt in your mind.
No doubt at all.
Mary Lou McDonald, we have to end there, but thank you very much for being on HARDtalk.